Who am I? Except not really much.
Yeah.
Not Nancy. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to members of council, staff, and of course, we have some special guests here as well for our presentation today, and all the members of our community in the audience as well. I'd like to call this meeting of the council and committee for the town of Petawawa to order on this day, April 22nd, 2024. Just before we get into it, for everybody's information, especially in the audience, this is our test evening up for our live streaming. So you'll notice there's some cameras and some monitors here. We're testing to see how this works, live streaming the council meetings for Petawawa out to the general public. Okay, we'll begin this meeting with our land acknowledgement, and this evening I'll ask Councillor Donovan to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As we gather this evening, I would like to acknowledge on behalf of the Petawawa Town Council and our community that we are meeting on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. We would like to thank the Algonquin people and express our respect and support for their rich history, and we are extremely grateful for their many and continued displays of friendship. We also thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years, and we wish to acknowledge our shared responsibilities in responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission 94 calls to action. Calls to action number 7. We call upon the federal government to develop with Aboriginal groups a joint strategy to eliminate educational and employment gaps between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal Canadians. New education funding models on reserves first provides base funding that is comparable to provincial systems across the country. Point two, provides First Nations children in kindergarten to grade 12 schools with additional support for language and cultural programming. Three, provides new resources that support full-time kindergarten in First Nations school for children ages 4 and 5. And fourth point, provides support for before and after school programming. Much still needs to be done to ensure Indigenous education and employment levels reach non-Indigenous averages.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donovan. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest on any of the matters before us? Okay. So we'll get started right away with our first presentation. Sorry, Karen, I know it would be Christine. Are you doing the introductions or do you want me? I will. Okay, so our first presentation is a development charge background study, and it's great to have Peter Simcisco here, managing partner, and Matt Barukas, senior consultant from Watson and Associates Economist Limited, all the way from Mississauga and Ottawa, to give us a little presentation on development charges. Great to have you here again.
It's an absolute pleasure to be back in Petawawa once again. Good evening, everyone. So we've just been going through a few presentation slides, and Scott, if I could see, make sure you can see all that. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, so as you might be aware, Watson and Associates economists have been retained by the town to undertake a development charges background study for 2024 to ensure that the town can continue to impose development charges moving forward beyond the expiry of its current development charges bylaw. With that study well underway now, getting close to completion, we thought it would be a good opportunity to provide a presentation to council to go through the legislative requirements for development charges study, kind of the background and context in that regard, and then to provide an overview of the draft findings to date, and then to also talk a little bit about what the process is going to look like moving forward. So in terms of and a little bit of introduction on development charges to start with. So really the purpose of development charges, which are a discretionary mechanism, and that mechanism is available to municipalities to help them recover the costs or investments that are needed to accommodate both residential and non-residential growth within the municipality. So recognizing that as the community grows, as there are additional people, additional houses built, additional employments in the non-residential building area that develops, that places additional service demands on infrastructure, both in terms of the hard services such as roads, water, and wastewater, but also creates the need for additional recreational space, for example, additional library space, and so on. So development charges are a mechanism that helps municipalities recover the costs associated with those investments. And really the intent is to help shelter, if you will, the existing taxpayers and ratepayers from bearing those costs of those initial investments that need to be made to expand services. The capital costs that are recovered through development charges are in addition to the costs that are, or the infrastructure that would be in place directly by a developer. So when a subdivision develops, oftentimes there are local or internal roads within that subdivision, various pipes that the developer has to put in, sidewalks, and so on. So because that's recovered directly from the developer or constructed directly by the developer, that's not included in the development charge. So development charges are intended for those broader infrastructure investments that have to be made across the municipality. The piece of legislation that empowers municipalities to impose these charges is the Development Charges Act. That act has undergone several rounds of amendments since the town last undertook its comprehensive background study. So I'll touch on a few of the changes that have occurred since that time. And just as recently as 2 weeks ago, there was the release of Bill 185, which has proposed some additional changes, basically walking back some of the changes that were introduced through Bill 23 last year. So we'll go through a little bit of that to provide that context, that some of those changes, if they pass, will have an impact on this study as well. So we're keeping close track of the bill as it proceeds through the legislature. and we'll be making those amendments to the background study as we move forward. So the town currently imposes development charges under bylaw 1280/19, and that development charge bylaw will expire on July 16th of this year. And in order for the town to continue imposing development charges, a new bylaw needs to be considered. And in order for that to happen, we need to go through a process of developing a background study. And so that's what brings us to the purpose of this meeting and the work that we've done to date. So in terms of those legislative changes that I alluded to, again, there have been several bills and acts that have provided for several amendments to the Development Charges Act since 2019. A number of those changes have already been addressed through a amendment that we undertook back in 2021 in response to some of those changes. However, there have been several amendments since that time again, namely through Bill 23, which is the third from the right on the illustration, which introduced the requirements to phase in any new development charge bylaw over a period of 5 years, where in the first year of the bylaw, a municipality can charge a maximum of 80% of the full calculated development charges, and then that percentage goes up by 5 percentage points each year until in year 5 of the bylaw, finally, a municipality is able to impose the full extent of the charge. Bill 23 also introduced some additional statutory exemptions for affordable and attainable housing units. Those provisions are not yet fully in effect at this point in time, but we have some indication from the province from a couple of weeks ago that they intend to fully enact those exemptions in June or July of this year. There have been also some discounts that have been provided through Bill 23 for rental housing developments. So the development charges payable on those units are discounted based on the number of units within those rental housing units. Bill 23 also removed the eligibility of growth-related studies from the list of capital costs that can be included in a development charge, and then some other technical changes as well. And finally, just to round up the highlights of Bill 23, they now allow development charge bylaws to have a shelf life of up to 10 years. So historically, the maximum shelf life was 5 years. That's why this current bylaw is expiring in July, as I mentioned earlier. But moving forward, a development charge bylaw can live for up to 10 years. So then with Bill 134, which was introduced last year, we saw some refinements to the definition of affordable housing units. Which again haven't been fully enacted yet, but have just refined those definitions once that does come into force. And then 2 weeks ago, we saw the introduction of Bill 185. And there are 3 key amendments that proposes to make. Again, mostly walking back some of the changes introduced through Bill 23. So they are now proposing to remove the mandatory 5-year phase-in once again. So going back to what things were like before Bill 23, they're proposing to bring studies back in as a eligible cost for recovery through development charges. And then they are also shortening the time frame on a development charge freeze. So as you might recall from the previous process, a development that proceeds through a site plan or zoning bylaw amendment application process, the development charges that they ultimately pay when they come forward for a building permit are based on the rates that were in effect when that planning application was submitted to the municipality. So, but they have a 2-year limit on that for that to apply. So that's being reduced from 2 years down to 18 months. So overall, I think what we've seen proposed through Bill 185 are positive changes that will ensure that municipalities can recover closer to the full extent of growth-related costs. Now, Bill 185 just got, I believe, second reading last week, and it's been ordered to standing committee. So it's hard to tell exactly when that might be back for third reading and royal assent, but judging by how quickly Bill 23 moved through that process, we're probably looking at about a month from now, likely. So if that does happen, we'll need to make some adjustments to the study that we're currently undertaking as a result. So then this next slide here provides a illustration of the methodology that has to be undertaken when preparing a development charges background study. The Development Charges Act is quite prescriptive in terms of the contents of that background study. There's a lot of information on the illustration here, so I'll just highlight a few of the key elements. And really the process starts by developing a growth forecast. So getting an understanding of the anticipated amount, type, and location of growth within the municipality. And we can take a short-term look, we can look out 10 years, we typically also look at a longer-term look because some of the services, particularly water and wastewater, are planned for over a longer planning horizon. So trying to identify that anticipated amount of growth. And then the next key step is trying to understand how much incremental service demand or what increase in need for service, more specifically, that additional growth will generate. And typically, we start by looking at that at a fairly high level, trying to identify whether there will be any capacity shortfalls, for example, in water treatment or wastewater treatment, whether there will be additional traffic that's going to be generated by that growth to identify those needs. And then from that point, we can start looking at specific projects, specific investments that have to be undertaken by the municipality to ensure that that increase in need for service would be met. So do we need to undertake a treatment plant expansion? Do we need to widen roads, extend roads? Do we need to expand facilities and so on? So it's really trying to understand at a very specific level what investments will need to be made to accommodate that increase in need for service. A key test that we have to observe is we have to measure those future increases in need for service relative to the historical service standard that's been provided in the municipality over the past 15 years. And the intent of that is to ensure that what we're asking future development to pay is not to provide for an increase to the level of service that's being provided. It's really just intended to help a municipality maintain the historical service levels. So that's a key test that has to be met. We're then looking at specific costs associated with those individual projects that are associated with growth and providing that additional capacity. We have to observe a few deductions as well. So to the extent the town is expecting any grants or external contributions towards any of those projects, we have to deduct that. Also to the extent that any given project would benefit the existing population. So this is typically observed where a new facility is being built, for example, that's replacing an existing facility. And the new one is going to be larger, so there's certainly an expansionary component, but it's also replacing something that existed previously. So we have to observe that benefit to existing as well to make sure that we're not, again, asking future development to pay for life cycle renewal of infrastructure through that process. And so once we compile all of those capital costs, observe those various deductions, we then have the net capital costs that are eligible for inclusion in the development charge. And then we're dividing those total costs by the anticipated amount of development. So on the residential side, that will produce a charge per capita, which we're then translating into a charge per unit based on average occupancy levels for different types of units, recognizing that an apartment will have fewer occupants than a single detached home, and therefore on average places a lesser demand on municipal services than an apartment. So that's recognized in the calculation of the charge. And then on the non-residential side, we're dividing those costs by the total amount of gross floor area that's expected to develop over the forecast period to come up with a charge per square foot or per square meter of gross floor area in that regard. So that's the math part of it. Then there are also various policy considerations as part of the process as well. So we need to look at whether the bylaw will apply on a municipal-wide basis or whether there are some components of the charge that should be charged more on an area-specific basis. A very good example of that is water and wastewater, where municipalities don't charge for those services in areas that don't receive that service. So that could be considered an area-specific charge, just like the town has done in that regard historically. And then various other policies such as exemptions, timing of adjustment of the development charge and so on. So we'll go through some of those in more specific detail as it pertains to the town's development charge bylaw a little bit later in the presentation. So that summarizes the methodology and the overall process that we need to go through. And I see that I'm missing the table on this slide here, but what was supposed to be there is just the schedule of current development charges. So we'll come back to those a little bit later anyhow, and just showing what the current rates are, because the rates do get adjusted annually for indexation, and so they are a little bit different from what appeared in the original bylaw, and that practice is going to be maintained moving forward as well. So then to provide some highlights of in terms of the draft findings that we're looking at as of today. So as I mentioned earlier, the starting point really is understanding the anticipated amount of growth within a municipality. So for the town, the growth forecast that underpins the development charges background study was developed on the draft official plan update document that's been prepared. So the growth targets to 2051 are anchored to the growth that's identified in that document. There was quite a bit of background work that went into developing that, and so we are embracing those growth forecasts in that regard. And so what we see in the table on this slide is the anticipated amount of growth, where first of all, population and employment within those different time horizons, so 2034 and 2051. And again, the reason we look at those two different time frames is that while we do have that long-term projection in the official plan update to 2051, currently a lot of the infrastructure needs that have been identified more relate to that 10-year growth increment. So there hasn't been or the underlying master planning studies haven't yet been updated to embrace that 2051 planning horizon. So that's something that may happen through future updates. So for now, we are planning the capital needs over a 10-year planning horizon. So you can see that to 2034, we're expecting the population to reach just under 20,100 people, and that represents a growth of about just over 1,500 people in the town over that 10-year time frame. And we're expecting that to be accompanied by about 970 additional dwelling units that will develop over that time frame. And then towards the right-hand side of the table, we have the employment numbers. So we can see that in terms of additional jobs in the town, we're expecting that to grow by about 834 additional jobs in the town over the 10 years, and that will be accommodated in just over 650,000 square feet of additional building area. So with that growth forecast, we are then looking at what services, first of all, are eligible for inclusion in the development charge study. And so on the slide here, we have the full list of services that are identified in the Development Charges Act as potentially eligible for inclusion. What we have highlighted with the teal color are the services that we have taken a look at through this process. So that includes water, wastewater services related to a highway, so this is your roads and related infrastructure, as well as fire protection, library, parks and recreation. So those are the same services that town has had in its development charge bylaws historically as well. And so we've just looked at those again to see what future needs exist in light of that growth forecast. In terms of the cost that can be included, so having looked at the services that are eligible for inclusion, just want to touch on the potential eligible costs. So municipalities can include the cost of acquiring land in the development charges background study and in the calculation of the charge, any costs related to making improvements to that land, then acquiring, leasing, or constructing facilities or infrastructure more generally, as well as equipment and rolling stock, and then any capital components of leases related to those items as well. So it doesn't necessarily need to be that the town is purchasing or constructing those items. It could be a lease as well, as long as that lease has a capital component. Circulation materials for libraries are also an eligible cost, even though they may not be capital in the traditional sense of the word. And then also interest on any money that the municipality needs to borrow to finance those acquisitions can be included in the calculation of the charge as well. On the right-hand side of the slide, then, we have a few noteworthy exclusions from those eligible capital costs, specifically any land acquired for the purposes of parks. And the reason that's excluded from the development charges regime is that there are provisions under the Planning Act that allow municipalities to secure land for parks or payment in lieu of providing park land by developers. Also, any vehicles and equipment that have a useful life of 7 years or less cannot be included. So just less than 7 years cannot be included in the calculation of the charge. Computer equipment is generally excluded from the list of eligible costs. And more recently, studies, which historically the town, just like most other municipalities, had studies as though they're an important aspect of understanding what those future infrastructure and service expansion needs might be. So as of right now, again, those are excluded, but that might come back if the 185 passes. So we're going to be working with town staff to identify those study costs as well, so that we have them ready for inclusion once that legislation passes as well. So those are a few of the note for the exclusions from the list of capital costs. So on the next slide, then, we have a summary of the capital needs that we have identified through this process. So again, looking at those, I think, 6 or so services that we have included in the bylaw and in the development church background study, we have identified over $12 million in total capital costs. And underlying those capital costs are specific projects. So I'm not going to go through the full list of them here. Those will be provided in full detail in the background study, but just to give you a sense of the types of service expansions and infrastructure upgrades that are included. So in services related to a highway, we have various shares of road urbanization projects that provide additional capacity for pedestrian or active transportation. More generally, multi-use pathways. We have some pedestrian crossovers, or at least some share of those costs in the background study as well as an expansion of the public works yard, because with the additional infrastructure comes the need for additional service vehicles and staffing, and so those capital costs are included as well. Within fire protection services, we have some additional fire protection space, whether that's in addition to an existing fire hall or potentially a new fire hall. Again, just identify the need for there to be some additional space over that 10-year planning period. So some costs have been included in that regard. Costs related to additional training facility space as well have been included. An aerial ladder apparatus has been included as well, as with taller buildings through development that's been identified as a need into the future as well. And then also some equipment for additional firefighters to increase that complement or potentially convert some to full-time firefighters over that period to make sure that the service levels can be maintained. In terms of parks and recreation, we have some trail and park development, as the town will be assuming additional land for parks through the development process. So again, we can't include the cost of the land because you're receiving that, but the cost to improve that land and actually turn it into an active park asset, those costs have been included as well. There's a new truck that would be required in parks and recreation, as well as some additional office space for parks and recreation staff, potentially over the forecast period as well. For library, we have some allowances for additional collection materials to, again, just maintain service levels in light of that future growth, as well as provision for additional library space over the forecast period as well. And then finally, in terms of water, wastewater, there are several infrastructure upgrades that have been identified, most of which were already identified in prior development church background studies. So just the costs have been updated. Projects that have been completed have been removed from the study. And there are also 2 potential plant expansions, of water treatment plant expansion and the wastewater treatment plant expansion that might be required over the long term as well. So we just looked at what share of those costs might be related to the population growth over the next 10 years versus that longer term forecast horizon as well. And so again, in total, we identified these capital needs. We did make several deductions, as you see in the donut chart with the various colors. There's the benefit to existing components. So to the extent some of these projects are upgrades of existing assets, we have observed those deductions in that regard. We have also recognized that there is some money in reserve funds from development charges that have been collected by the town historically that are available to offset some of those future capital needs. And then there's also a post-period benefit component. So that's the piece that relates to specifically the water and wastewater treatment plant upgrades, which will service growth over a longer time frame than just the 10-year forecast period in the background study. And similarly, that ladder apparatus as well, because that's not just related to growth over the next 10 years, but it will provide services for growth over a longer term. So that post-period benefit component is related to growth, but not related to growth in our 10-year planning horizon at the moment. So those costs will be recovered through future development charges. But in total, we have just under $12 million in capital costs that have been included in the calculation of the charge. So then on the next slide here, we just have the full schedule of calculated development charges as we understand those capital needs today. And those, just want to point out that the different charges are differentiated by type of residential units, so different rates for single and semi-detached homes, different rates for apartment units, and then on the far right-hand side of the table, we have the calculated charges per square foot of non-residential gross floor area. Perhaps more informative than that full schedule of charges is the next 2 slides, which provide a comparison of those calculated charges to the charges that are currently in effect. And so the first comparison is showing the charges applicable to a single or semi-detached house. In the second column of the table, you see the charges that are currently in effect. That's at 90% of the required phase-in. And then the third column next to that identifies the charges that have been calculated through this process. And then the fourth column provides the difference. So in terms of the full calculated rates, we see that for the municipal-wide services, so this is everything other than water and wastewater, the calculated charges are about $238 higher than the charge that's currently in effect. And then for water and wastewater combined, the calculated charges are about just under $1,000 more than the charges that are currently in effect. And again, that's a full calculated rate. However, unless Bill 185 passes, the town will need to observe the 5-year phase-in. And so what we have also shown in the last two columns of the table here are the charges that would actually come into effect once the new bylaw is passed, assuming that they will need to be at 80% of the full calculated rate. And so that would actually result in a reduction of the development charges applicable for municipal-wide services, and also a small reduction to the charges for water and wastewater if that phase-in has to be observed. So then on the next slide, we have a similar comparison, but this time for the non-residential component of the charge, where again, we are seeing an increase to the town-wide services of about 18 cents per square foot, from $2.10 to $2.28 per square foot. And then for water, wastewater, we are seeing an increase from $2.87 per square foot to $3.57 per square foot in that regard. So we are seeing some increases, but those are largely a result of updating the capital costs based on recent or current estimates. There hasn't been a lot of additional projects added relative to the last background study, with a few notable exceptions to that, such as the aerial ladder truck, which is a newer item that's come to light, and a few other items as well. So then to put those calculated charges into some context, we have undertaken a survey of development charges in other area municipalities. So on this next chart, we are showing the comparison for a single detached dwelling. So what are the charges that would apply within the town currently? And that's the gray middle arrow. And then showing what the similar charges would be for that same type of housing unit in other area municipalities. And then what we are showing with the two teal arrows to the left and to the right of the current charge are the rates that would come into effect under this new bylaw based on the charges that have been calculated, either without the phase-in. If that gets removed, that's the arrow to the left, so there would be an increase to the development charge, or a slight decrease if the phase-in still has to be observed. But what it also shows is that the relative position of the town relative to these comparator municipalities would be unchanged with the calculated rates either way. Then we have a very similar comparison on the next slide, this time for a hypothetical commercial development. So these are charges applicable per square foot of gross floor area in the comparator municipalities. And again, what we see is that with the calculated charges, either with or without the phase-in, those rates would still maintain the relative positioning of the town with respect to those comparator municipalities. And then just the same comparison on the next slide, this time for industrial development, but in this case, those industrial and commercial rates are the same, so it's the same illustration. So then in the last part of the presentation, I just want to go through a few of the key policy areas that have to be addressed in the development charge bylaw. So first of all, there are a number of statutory exemptions that are set out in the Development Charges Act itself, so each municipality needs to observe those. So upper and lower tier governments, as well as school board entities, are fully exempt from the development charges. Expansions of industrial buildings up to 50% of the existing gross floor area, so that expansion can occur without triggering a development charge. University lands are exempt from development charges. Enlargements of residential units are exempt, as well as additional residential units. So at this point, someone can add up to 2 additional residential units to a single detached home without paying a development charge on those additional units. So there are some limits to that by kind of build form, but for a typical single detached home, the limit is 2 additional dwelling units without payment of development charges. Then we also have exemptions for the affordable and attainable housing. As I mentioned earlier, those are not fully enforced yet. We do have some definitions around what affordability will mean, how that will be measured, but we have yet to see some technical details from the province on that, and we're expecting that later this year. And then similarly, the attainable housing exemption is not yet enforced. We're awaiting some specific definitions around what will be considered to be an attainable housing unit. And then not-for-profit housing developments will be exempt. And then, as mentioned earlier, there are also discounts for rental housing units based on the number of bedrooms in that unit. So in addition to those statutory exemptions, municipalities also have the ability to introduce discretionary exemptions within their bylaws to potentially help incentivize certain types of development. So within the town's development charge bylaw, the exemptions that currently exist are for Garrison Petawawa. There's also an exemption for places of worship as well, and then also for development of farm buildings. So those three types of development are fully exempt from development charges. Those exemptions are very much in line with what we see in many other municipal bylaws as well. So for the time being, we're proposing to maintain those exemptions, but of course we welcome any feedback if you feel that any additional exemptions should be considered or potentially removal of any of these exemptions. That certainly can be looked at through this process. One thing to note is that any exemption or any revenue foregone from any type of exemption cannot be made up for by increasing the development charges on other types of development. So it becomes the cost of the taxpayer or the ratepayer through any exemption policy that's introduced. So that's something to always bear in mind when we talk about exemptions. A couple more policy items here, redevelopment credits. So this is something that's very commonly observed in municipal development charge bylaws. So this recognizes that, for example, if someone is demolishing an existing house and building 2 new homes on that property, we would calculate the development charges payable on the 2 new homes, but then we would credit them the development charges that would have been payable on the house that previously existed on the site. So it's just to recognize that there was some existing service capacity there. Similarly, if there is a change of use or a conversion from one use to another, similar type of redevelopment credit would apply in those situations as well. And then finally, indexation. So recognizing that costs continue to escalate between the times that the development charges background study is completed. The Development Charges Act does allow municipalities to adjust the development charge. There's a prescribed index that has to be used for that annual indexation. That's the non-residential construction price index. And the practice in the town historically has been to update those charges or index them annually on January 1st. So what we're going to be proposing is that provision be maintained moving forward as well. So that summarizes the draft findings in terms of the calculated charges, as well as some of the key policy matters that we've gone through as part of this process. And so just to wrap up, in terms of the next steps, obviously happy to receive any feedback or questions that council might have tonight. We will be publishing the formal development charges background study that will provide the full details of the growth forecast, the capital needs that have been identified, or the policy matters in the draft bylaws that will need to be published on the town's website by May 8th. We will then be holding a public meeting to allow the public to provide their input on the proposed bylaws as well on June 17th. That's a statutory requirement under the Development Charges Act. And then finally, council will be in a position to consider approving the development charges background study and the associated bylaws on July 8th. That's when we expect those new bylaws to come forward for approval. And again, the current bylaw will be expiring on July 8th and 16th. So that July 8th meeting has been set to ensure that a new development charge bylaw is in place prior to the expiry of the existing one. So that summarizes the formal part of the presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. I'll open it up for questions from members of council. Councilor Carmen.
Thank you, Mayor Service. Thanks, Peter, again for a great explanation of a pretty complicated subject. And I have a couple of questions, but one has to do with the exemptions, in particular with the garrison, and maybe some rationale around that. I can understand where, let's say, if a building, or the garrison erected a new building, it may not, or it wouldn't put a draw on certain services, like library services, for example. The people working in that building, that their library services would be accounted for elsewhere. But it certainly would be a direct impact on something like wastewater and provision of water. So what's the rationale for not recovering that?
So I believe historically and that exemption has been in the town's bylaws going back several bylaws. And I believe the rationale was that even if the exemption wasn't in the bylaw, because development on garrison properties doesn't require a building permit from the town, it wouldn't trigger a development charge anyway. Right, so just more explicitly stated in the bylaw directly that entity is exempt, because even if they weren't under the bylaw, there would be nothing to actually trigger a development charge in the first place. So it's more of a formality, if you will.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had to do with the population growth numbers. So if, let's say, for example, the numbers were off by a factor of, maybe they were off by 5%, 10% or something, and our population was in fact quite a bit higher than what the projected population was, how would that impact the study, or is it all relative?
That's a really good point. It is all relative. I think that's a really good way to put it, in the sense that we always look at these capital needs that have been identified relative to that growth. And so if we said, look, that growth is going to be 10 or 50% higher, presumably the infrastructure investments would also be higher to accommodate that greater amount of population growth. And so the charge effectively per capita would still be relatively constant. And similarly to, let's say, that growth happens faster than when we projected, and some of the growth that's expected to occur out to 2051 happens over the next 5 years. Similarly, because the calculation ensures that the charge on a per capita basis is correct, if the growth happens faster, that means the development charge revenues come in faster, and that means you can still pay the proper amount or proper share of any future capital investments that need to be made to accommodate that growth. So the calculations and the capital needs and the calculation are always done relative to specific growth numbers. So if there was more growth expected, there would be more capital needs that would enter the calculation as well, typically.
Thank you.
Just to follow up on that line of questioning, I noticed that the projected population numbers were in the mid 18,000s, and I believe the latest, not projection, but the latest numbers we have is that we're at about 19,300 or something already. So if we follow up on Councillor Carmody's question, and your answer makes sense that everything's all relative and the percentages will increase the DC revenue. But for example, if that kind of increased growth happens at such an increased rate, and it's putting pressure on, let's say, wastewater, is there something in this study that would say, if these pressures are in place, then you have to act a little quicker on some of these upgrades?
Not in the development charges background study itself. Typically, that would be addressed through a master planning exercise. So like an infrastructure master planning study, which that would say when you hit certain population or employment thresholds, that's when we're looking at undertaking an environmental assessment for a plant upgrade, for example, right? So typically it's those master planning studies that inform those triggers for those considerations. The development charges study just looks at, if those triggers occur, how will we finance them, hopefully partially or fully in some cases through the development charge.
Okay, thanks for straightening that out. Deputy Mayor Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Peter, for the presentation. Just to follow up on James Carmody's question with respect to Garrison, Petawawa, and the exemption, I understand that they don't trigger a building permit. I do believe, though, that we do get an impact assessment related to growth. So there would be a way to institute, I guess, a development charge. Whether you can backdate it or not is the question. And there is tremendous growth in Garrison, and it does put a strain on some of our services, and certainly does, people are using our roads, they're using wastewater and all of that kind of stuff. So I guess I would like there maybe to be a little bit more looked into about whether or not we can actually do something, because like I said, we do get the back end of the impact assessment that goes up as a result of the buildings that the building that has occurred. My second point is just in relation to the Build More Homes Act. I just find it very interesting, which is my personal observation, that a single detached development right now is 4468. And then we're going to be phasing in, so they're actually going to be losing money for the phase-in over the next few years. I could have understood, and the government decided that they would phase in the actual difference of $200. That would make more sense to me, but anyway, that's my observation. So I'll just leave that with you.
And thank you. I certainly appreciate that. I think we share the same view. We've always said that the phase-in would make sense, perhaps, or to some extent, if it was on an increase to a development charge, but the phase-in applies whether the charge is going up or down or staying the same. So if it's the charge would otherwise stay the same, it's going to go down by virtue of the phase-in, at least for the first number of years, right? So it doesn't seem to make sense. Perhaps that's why it's been proposed to be removed again. I think there was a lot of pushback on the phase-in provision specifically. And then back to the comment about the garrison, certainly something we can explore a little bit more. Under the Development Charges Act, there are specific triggers for the development charge, and the building permit typically is the key trigger. So unfortunately, even though there is that assessment that you receive from MPAC, that's not one of the triggers identified in the Development Charges Act for imposing a charge. That being said, I think you have opportunities to look at some kind of payment in lieu of a development charge through some of the water wastewater rate study work and assessments that get undertaken from time to time as well. So something that we can certainly look at, because there are certain infrastructure demands that arise from development within that entity as well. Right? So it's something that I'll look further into.
Further questions or comments on the study? Okay, so I guess the next steps are that we'll see a public meeting on June 17th, and that'll give the members of our community a chance to come out and give their comments on the DC study. And then if all goes well, we're hoping there won't be too many amendments that you have to make. And then on July 8th, it will come before council again, and we'll have a chance to pass it should we wish to. Okay, so thank you very much for coming, you and Matt, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on June 17th for the public meeting here in Petawawa.
That's good. My pleasure, as always. Thanks everyone for this evening.
Safe drive home, and we have a packed agenda. You're welcome to stay for all the fun and excitement, or you can sneak out.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll carry on with finance and management. Christine. We've got FIN-06-2024, the 2024 year-to-date financial results. So this is new for all of us. We're used to getting these monthly, and this is our first quarterly report. Okay, we're ready.
Thank you, and I want to apologize to the audience in terms of the development charges and then this financial report getting killed by numbers tonight. I apologize. But it is worthwhile and important information for council as well as the public to receive and understand. Again, as pointed out by the mayor, this is the first kick at the can. It's not going to be the final format that we go with, but I will summarize and highlight certain things of the report, open it up to questions as well as feedback in terms of content. I'm still gathering information from other municipalities who also do quarterly reports. So this is an iterative process in terms of what this report will look like over time. So without further ado, the format of the report, I tried to emulate and follow the format that we used for our budget process. So separating out operating and the capital budget, again, with the same categories that were presented to council throughout the budget deliberation process. So with that being said, I will refresh your memory in terms of some of the acronyms and try to summarize some line items. So for example, M&S util in tech, that one line there. So that's materials, supplies, insurance, utilities and technology. So kind of the day-to-day purchasing for each department that's needed to keep things running beyond the staff costs. And again, going into to staff costs, for example, that includes not just salaries and benefits, but training and development, trade shows, conferences, the entire investment in the staff as a whole. And then just note on the contractors line, so that is departmentally different depending on the department. So for example, we're talking about the environment department, that's the garbage contract. If we're talking about water and wastewater, that's aqua. For administration, that could be legal or architecture or engineering services. So it is heavily dependent on the department. So again, I've gone through for each of the operating budgets by department and tried to highlight revenues and expenses and bring to council's attention or the reader's attention whether things were on track, if there were things out of line or outside of expectations, to give you a sense of or a pulse of where they are, and to help explain some of the seasonality of the business, especially property tax revenues, garbage revenues, so on and so forth.
Christine?
Yeah.
And this is a question for Scott too. Are we able to put that up on the?
I'm trying to, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just so that
Yeah.
folks that have joined us here tonight.
Oh, no, it won't be up here, sorry.
Oh, it won't be up there?
Yeah,
Run into some technical difficulties
Okay.
that we will resolve.
We're doing a lot of technical new things here tonight. It's hard to get everything.
Part of
Okay.
the modernization efforts.
All right, carry on.
So I will pause and just to focus on the operational budget at this time. If there's any specific questions, I'm happy to address them. I did attempt to address them preemptively in the report, but I'm happy to take any questions on the operating budget first and foremost. Go.
All
Are there any questions on the operating budget? Or just the admin section?
Or the whole thing, if there's anything specific. I can also wait to the end too as well.
Yeah, why don't we just
Okay.
go through?
Perfect. So again, aligning with the budget process, breaking out the capital budget. I know we've had multiple slides going through the budget deliberation process. I wanted to consolidate it into one list, and give you a status update of whether it's underway, in progress, or from a tender process too as well. So the one thing that I will point out is there is some year-end work that we are still working on from reserve transfers and balancing. So from a capital budget perspective, or capital projects, I should say, there's nothing offside, although I do want to draw attention, for example, the comfort station completion. So although we budgeted that 164, that is just the property tax revenue portion. We do have monies in reserve to fund that overage. So it's just an oversight. But we have reserve balances going back to actually 2022, as well as unspent funds from 2023 to address that difference. And looking at the project overall, the duration of the project, not just on a singular year. Over the 3 years, we are still under budget and are expected to come in under budget for the project as a whole. That was the only highlight or topic that I wanted to address. That's the capital budget update there. I can pause here. So far, so good. All right. So again, the last section of the report is expenditures by vendor. Given previous discussions in terms of the value of just a list of checks, you don't really get to see that story or that timeline in terms of how much we're spending and where we're spending. So going I've given you some high level statistics in terms of the number of vendors, the total dollar amount, average dollar amount. And the reason I picked the number of vendors that were paid over $100,000, my goal every report is to get you at least 75% coverage in terms of what we've paid within the quarter. So $100,000, $100,000 actually got us 84% coverage out of the $9 million plus. So from my background in best practices, giving you visibility to over 75% of our expenses. I don't need to see a $20 donation or charge, but to give you the big dollars and cents, excuse me, in terms of what we're doing. That's the more valuable information to give you. I do also want to point out the contributions to the county as well as some school boards. Those don't necessarily show up as an expense. The municipality is a flow through or conduit, if you will. So all of the property tax bills that we all love, a portion of that goes directly to the county and school board. So that is not all our money that we collect. And you can see that we've given quite a bit to the county and other school boards on that list as well. That's it. I'm happy to take any questions as well as comments or feedback for future iterations of this report.
Okay, thank you. So I think we'll start off with questions on the departmental budgets. So we did a quick flyby there of each of the departmental budgets. And I like the way you've laid them all out so that we're seeing each department there and where the money is spent for the first quarter anyways on each of those departments. So do we have any questions about the departmental budget? No? Okay, then we'll go to the list of capital budget items. So those are the projects that are ongoing or forecasted for the 2024 budget year. And this is what's been spent or which projects are underway already in the first quarter. Any questions there? Any of those projects? All right. And then the last section we just went through is the vendors paid. I like this section. It's an interesting way of looking at things rather than trying to find certain expenditures in a list of 1,000 different checks. Any questions on the vendors? No. Okay. Any questions on the as a whole? Deputy Mayor Sam.
I'm going to go, not a question, but a comment. I do like the capital budget. I think it's very clean. It's very clear. It's very crisp. We know exactly where we are and what we spent. So thank you very much for your effort. Appreciate it.
Councilor Kern.
Thank you, Mayor Service. Thanks for this report, Christine. I think it's a great addition to our agendas. And it's something that I'm sure will become more valuable as supporters roll on. So there's not too much to see in Q1, but by Q3, it might be more clear what's really happening. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? You're getting a few thumbs up. Okay, nothing else then? All right, then I need a motion to accept the report. Moved by Deputy Mayor Sadler, seconded by Councilor Donovan. This new way of forming the desk here, my head can't move.
I can get Molly in there.
Maybe I should be looking at the screen. So that was moved by Deputy Mayor Sadler, seconded by Councilor Donovan, that this report be accepted as information. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Just give me a second. I'm looking at the screen. It's carried. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Public Works monthly report for March 2024. Chris.
Sure. All right. Evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Thanks for having me tonight. All right, we'll blast through the monthly report, and we'll just start with quick Capital Works Director update. So Public Works expansion, briefly there, just we're going to go to tender this week, either April 23rd or 25th. 25th? 23rd? 25th. There we go, confirmed. So going to tender this week for the Public Works expansion. Comfort Station is still on schedule for completion in early May. Wolf Avenue and Portage Phase 2. So we've had our pre-construction meeting on April 9th with staff from JP2G, staff from the town of Petawawa, and also our contractor from Dual Construction. And that project is set to start the first week of May. We've also had our pre-construction meeting for Portage that was held on April 18th. Again, members of the town, members of JP2G, and McRae Excavating Limited, and that project is set to start on June 3rd. Both projects, just update you on a very important point. Thank you, Deputy Mayor, for bringing it back to my attention. All of our bi-weekly construction meetings will be held on site for both of those projects. The idea there is to enhance safety, work on safety protocols, ensure that the job site is meeting the expectations of the town, and that the contractors is doing their due diligence, and also that the town is happy with what we're seeing, so that not only are the contractors safe, but we want to ensure that pedestrians and the road users are safe as well. So it's paramount for these projects, and I've communicated that extensively during meetings. Okay. Murphy Road urbanization is set to go to tender this week as well, on the 25th, with a closing date of May 14th. So we're moving ahead nicely with that project as well. And our in-house road projects are going to start in the next few weeks. Half loads were removed today from the town and also from the county of Renfrew. So we got the green light to get moving on our in-house projects as well. As far as fleet procurement, our loader tender will be out this week. It's already out. Oh, thanks, Don. Perfect. So our loader tender is already out. So we're moving ahead well with our capital plan for this year. And then net zero project, quick update on that. And as far as our operations update, basically, as you can see throughout the report, it was essentially just a slow shutdown from a fairly easy winter and moving into spring cleanup, those types of duties. And also wanted to point out a big thanks to Teddy, Suco, Peter LaPointe, and all the staff at Public Works that made all the efforts to get the ATCO trailer installed out at Public Works, and to welcome Trevor and I out to our, I call it the Construction Command Center. So you're more than welcome to stop in and take the, we even got a little meeting room there in the middle, so feel free to stop in and see us. But it's nice to be out there with the group again. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell for the monthly report. Happy to take questions.
Any questions on the monthly report? Okay, I just have a couple. The comfort station, you said, looks like could be completed in the month of May. Are we looking at any type of grand opening, ribbon cutting, and when might that be?
Mr. Mayor, I think what I'd like to do first is once the building is complete, there were some site works that we had left out of the tender as cost saving measures to be dealt with through our own, whether it's contracted or whether it's our own staff. So I'd like to make sure the site works are taken care of in the surrounding area. Once the construction, all the construction debris is mobilized out and the fencing's been taken down, I'd like to make sure that everything's been taken care of around the site first. So I'll follow up with you and the members of council on a grand opening.
Okay, sounds good. And just a question on your in-house projects. I noticed there's about 4 or 5 of them there. Is there a schedule in terms of what you're going to do first? Are they all happening at once? I guess just wondering where the Laurentian Drive month is falling in that schedule.
I actually don't have a set schedule for the month, Mr. Mayor. I think the 2 we'd like to knock off first would be Industrial and Black Bay Road. They both involve pulverizing the roadway. So if we can secure the contractor to come in to pulverize both of those roads at one mobilization, it will save money. So those are the 2 biggest projects as far as scope and budget. So I think we'd like to get at those early on. Florence Street was a fairly small project that I'm really hoping to do with mainly in-house resources. And then the multi-use pathway would be later this summer.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Yeah, I just want to point something out here. Give a little congratulations to Chris Mantha, our Director of Public Works. We've been awarded the Certified Municipal Manager Level 3.
Thank you.
It's quite an achievement, so congratulations on completing that course and upgrading yourself. That's quite an accomplishment.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. And I did just a quick thanks to all the great people that I've worked with in my career. It's been a great journey. I'm still learning. Still pretty young, I think. Some gas left in the tank, so maybe there's a few more designations yet, but thank you very much. It's appreciated.
Okay, so I need a motion to accept this report. Moved by Councilor Roots, seconded by Councilor Carmody, that the Public Works monthly report for March be accepted as information. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Thanks, carried. Okay, next we have PW-11-2024 Off-Road Vehicle Bylaw 1597/23, proposed Phase 2 resident survey and road network field review. So I guess your staff has been busy out there, Chris, and we're going to hear what they have discovered.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think everybody has stuck around for this, so thanks for staying. All right. Oh, and I should say big thanks again to Don Rakowski, our administrative coordinator, who has helped me so much with this report. So thanks, Don. All right. So we are looking for direction tonight as far as the off-road vehicle use proposed Phase 2. So we'll start with some background. I'm going to try to just highlight the important points so that we don't take quite so long. So at the March 4th council meeting, we presented report PW03-2024, which was the off-road vehicle bylaw Phase 1 review. And at this meeting, council gave us the following resolution for staff, which was directing staff to complete a field review of the town's road network in Phase 2 and to establish a baseline for comparative purposes and to identify and mitigate any hazards, and also schedule an open house or resident survey through general mail by the end of April. So we're back tonight at the end of April to go through the findings from that direction for staff. So council identified the Phase 2 proposed designated routes as follows. I handed everybody a larger map, which hopefully help everyone to be able to see it. And they are color coded, and you have them there, and they are on the staff report. So staff prepared a survey and a letter which targeted the 5 proposed designated routes. The letters were hand delivered on March 13th, 14th, and 15th by our Public Works seasonal winter staff, with a deadline to respond by 11 p.m. on April 1st. Approximately 1,390 letters were hand delivered, with an additional 25 letters mailed to property owners of multi-residential and or vacant land properties. Staff also prepared a road inspection report to undertake a field review of the road network located within the proposed Phase 2 designated routes, as recommended by the town's insurer. And this review was conducted on March 27th, March 28th, and April 2nd. So from those reviews, the following discussion items are noted. Staff received the 2023 fourth quarter collision statistics from the OPP on March 6th, which indicated there were 3 ORV collisions within the municipal boundaries of the town from October 1st to December 31st, 2023. However, it should be noted that these collisions involved 2-wheeled off-road vehicles, and only one of the collisions occurred on a municipal road. So they weren't actually 4-wheelers or side-by-side, which we are talking about tonight. The road inspection report, which was reviewed by myself, and as it states there, I'm of the opinion that I didn't note any impediments that would negatively affect the operation of ORVs on the rural roads located within the proposed Phase 2 designated routes. So as far as the results of the survey garnered 368 responses, and you can see on the next page, page 3, we have 67% in favor of expanding the designated off-road vehicle routes on rural municipal roads without sidewalks and curbing. We had 31% who are not in favor of expanding this proposal, and 2% were undecided. The chart is there in your report, which kind of gives the for and against percentages based on the color zone. And of course, at the bottom, the top 5 reasons for supporting the expansion of the ROV routes are as follows. Reduce the need to trailer off-road vehicles to the access points, promote recreation and outdoor activities, better and or more direct access to trails, promote family activities and outings, and increase tourism to Petawawa. The top 5 reasons for not supporting the expansion of the ORV routes are as follows. Increase in noise, safety of pedestrians and bicyclists, speeding, lack of enforcement, reckless, dangerous, or impaired driving, and negative impacts to quality of life. We also mentioned private roads, and there was a little bit of confusion on that. I think what we were intending was to mention to the public that if they lived on a private road, they could use other roads to access the trail. I think they thought that we were opening private roads to ORVs to access different places through the private roads. That wasn't really the intention, so we've clarified that. And then Sharon Street in Garwin, there was a little clarification there just with regards to accessing the trail through the private property of the lumberyard, and we will make an adjustment, of course, to leave those roads out of the phase 2 if we move forward with the next phase. Streetlights were also a concern, and there were some areas, but essentially, if you look at your map, basically purple, blue, and a few of the areas in orange. Those areas within the town have streetlights predominantly at intersections or at sharp curves. They are not like through the entire road network. And that's been like that for, well, since before we did the LED upgrade in 2014, 2015. All right, so options for consideration. Following the results of the road network field review and the resident survey, council has several options available for consideration. Council may wish to make no changes to the current off-road vehicle bylaw and remain status quo. Council may wish to provide access to all 5 proposed designated ORV routes as shown in the diagram. And council may wish to provide access to only some of the proposed designated ORV routes based on the survey. And council may wish to seek further public consultation before making a decision. So Public Works staff are looking for direction from council on how to proceed with phase 2 regarding ORV access to town roads. And as far as financial implication, there would be, if we were to move forward with phase 2, there would be more signage required. That would be essentially the cost for the signs. The staff time to put the signs up is covered through a normal O&M budget. And that is essentially the report in a nutshell. Happy to take questions.
Okay, just before I open it up for questions, just in terms of the county roads, because some of these little networks are crossing over Laurentian and of course the boulevard to get to the trails.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have to go separately to the county to seek their permission, or is, because I know we did originally when we had the first crossovers. Have we done that, or are we planning on doing that?
My understanding is if council adopts to go forward with phase 2, we would then approach the county and seek access for those county roads.
Okay. And just another piece of information for council's benefit and for the audience: on Wednesday and 2 days from now at the county council meeting, there is a proposal coming forward to spend some money. I can't say how much because that's to be determined. And I can't really confirm how many hours because that is yet to be determined as well. But the county is considering acquiring the services of Protect 5 to do some vital enforcement specifically on Algonquin Trail throughout the length of the trail in Renfrew County. As part of the process, they've said that it will center around one of the more urban areas. So Arnprior, Renfrew, Petawawa, Pembroke, Laurentian Valley. And in terms of what times of the year and what hours of the day, all of that is yet to be determined. But that is something that is coming before county council in a couple of days. And should that pass, there will be increased enforcement on the trails in addition to what the OPP is already providing. So the county's hope is that with this additional enforcement, it will help clean up some of the areas and some of the problems that are occurring on the Algonquin Trail. Okay, so I just thought I'd let you know that, and I'll open up more questions or comments. Councilor Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Chris. I just wanted to acknowledge, Chris, that this was an excellently prepared review. There was lots of good data, and Don, lots of good data in there. You spent some time working out the data and giving us some information along that way. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Councilor Perrin.
Thank you for your service. Thanks to Chris and Don as well. I'll echo Councillor Donovan's comments. Very nice report, very well done. And I think it's pretty clear that the overwhelming majority of people surveyed wish to see this access provided to them. And in the one area that it was even close was in the Levine Crescent area, and odd that it's an area that backs right onto the trail. But anyway, there was only 21 respondents in that case. I think it's quite clear to me that the overwhelming majority is in favor of this, and I'm in favor of moving ahead with the full implementation of phase 2.
Deputy Mayor Sam.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for undertaking the survey. Getting a 25% response rate is really top notch, and it shows, it demonstrates, at least with my rudimentary math capacities, it demonstrates that 75% of people want to see this go forward. So I guess the two areas that I saw and makes sense to me would be in some areas lighting is poor. As you pointed out, though, lighting has been poor in those areas for a long time. I don't think it means that we should look at lighting and increase capacity because there are some areas of our town that are absolutely pitch black, and that's just dangerous no matter who's on the road driving what. And enforcement. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you for that information. Hopefully the town will go ahead. And just like anything else, if residents see something that is against the law, then it's their duty to report so that it can be investigated and taken a look at. So if we follow the process and do our own due diligence, I too have no problem implementing the full phase 2 for off-road vehicles. Thank you.
Councilor Christie.
Thank you, Mayor Service, and thank you sincerely, Chris. This is a really tremendous amount of work, and I really admire your whole department for everything they do every day. I'm of the opinion that we may not have all the information we need to make a determination at this time. I'll note that our insurer notified us that the adequacy of street lighting should be part of our determination because it affects town liability. So we don't have any information on the adequacy of street lighting. The road analysis was undertaken during the day, so we don't know that. So I was interested in motioning to move this item until such a time as we have the information on street lighting. And Chris has indicated that this information might already be at our disposal and able to be shared, but to my mind, we haven't done our due diligence until we've really looked at that piece.
Further questions or comments? Councilor Kern.
Thank you, Mayor Service. Just with respect to street lighting, I would counter that if the current level of street lighting presents a danger to people on ORVs, then it would equally present a danger to people in all sorts of other vehicles. So I don't see that as an impediment to moving forward with this.
Councilor Christie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, James. Just to refer to how our insurer places it, it's more to do with the speed differential. So the idea you have a slow moving ORV and then a car moving at speed. So it's the encounter between the two, and also that ORV's encounter then with pedestrians. And I'm not going to quote you lumens on ATVs, but it's not quite the same for cars, it's a different standard. So again, this has been flagged by our insurer as an issue, that intersection between a slow moving RV and a fast moving car in the dark.
Councillor Carmen?
In that case, we would need restrictions on the use of bicycles after dark and every other type of vehicle or pedestrians in general. So once again, I can't see where the onus should be put on ORVs as the only slowly moving vehicle that they need to be restricted.
Are there questions or comments? I'd just like to make one comment. Having read through all of the comments from all of the survey takers, it was interesting to note that, and maybe there was a miscommunication in terms of how this phase 2 is going to roll out, but I noticed quite a few comments that showed concern that the ATVs are now going to be entering all of these neighborhoods, as if our phase 2 is opening up these roads as a ATV playground. And I seem to get that impression from some of the comments, where really what we're doing is we're allowing your neighbors who want to access the trails to travel at 20 kilometers an hour from their home through your neighborhood to access the trail. So I'm hoping there wasn't a miscommunication in terms of what phase 2 is. So phase 2 is we're allowing people who live in these neighborhoods to leave their home, go 20 kilometers an hour, and get themselves to the Algonquin. Councillor Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to highlight something that our partners at the OPP had highlighted to us, is that it's unenforceable. They cannot enforce the idea that you only access those routes to access the trails. So to me, that is still a pressing issue with the bylaw being unenforceable.
Any other questions or comments? No? No? Okay.
Thank you,
Councillor
Mr.
Couture?
Just to ask, I wondered if you were going to vote maybe on my motion to table the item, and if not, I could have just another minute or two for comment if we're going to discuss any other motions tonight.
Since you have the mic, if you want to make your additional comments, that's okay.
Just to say, I would love to have more information on street lighting, but driving around the other day as I did note all the dark zones that we have. Just to say, reading over the statistics, I'll note that we only had 17% of those who were handed a letter vote yes. And we only had 8% of those handed a letter vote no. So it's not the overwhelming majority of these residents who voted yes or no. It's the majority of those who responded, just to draw that fine line. But also, I know there are some issues that were identified in the road inspection reports. These include sharp curves with poor visibility, blind curves, poor sight lines to oncoming traffic, and on the crested hills. So I'm concerned with two groups specifically, and the first is ORV users themselves. So I've spoken about the speed differential issue plagued by insurance, and the idea that they might not have distance or space. Cars might not have distance or space to move out of the way of an ORV. But the second group I'm worried about is vulnerable road users. So this includes dog walkers, seniors, children, bicyclists, and on these rural roads, the road is the sidewalk. So this is a real shared use situation. And I'm further concerned about Pineview Elementary School being in such proximity to the proposed expansion areas. So to be clear, I really support the bylaw as it is in place. I think it's good for tourism, good for recreation, but we do need to be careful and cautious and balance recreational desires with safety concerns. So to me, I'm comfortable with the balance that we've already struck with the bylaw as it is, where we've opened up the entire west of the highway and some key access points in Black Bay Road. So I'm interested in seeing the town invest in more parking spaces by the trail, et cetera. But as far as this current extension, just given the issues of liability, visibility, and vulnerable road users, I won't be supporting it.
Thank you. Councillor Carmen.
Thank you, Mayor Service. I'd just like to mention that in the past couple of months, I've had discussions with the mayors of a couple of municipalities, our neighboring municipalities, who have brought in ORV bylaws and opened up their entire communities to ORV travel. And there have been minimal problems and no major complaints.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Sadler?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Coutu does raise an important point with respect to the lighting, and I would have no problem still supporting this after we get that lighting report. It should be, could be a couple of weeks. I don't know. I don't know what's entailed. I'm looking at you, Chris, to see what, if you know what's entailed. It might be far more complex than I think, but there are some areas that are, like I said, absolutely pitch black, and that's concerning at any given time. And so, like I said, I'm still supportive of moving forward with this, as long, as long as it is in fact, as safe as we can make it, with the information and data that we have. So thank you, Councillor Coutu, for flagging that again.
Okay, I thought I would add that through my research today, I did find staff report from 2015 for the LED conversion, along with the contractor proposals for the switchover of the lighting. But I was unable today to find any report that showed like a luminary study. There may still be one, but I don't want to say for sure that there is one, because it could be there wasn't one done. It could have just been a proposal, like a tender or a request for a proposal to take all our existing high energy use bulbs and change them, which is essentially what I was gathering in that 2015 report. Another item to consider too is, and although the population is different, we should also consider the fact that when we opened up west of Highway 17, there's minimal street lighting on all those roads, probably less than what's in the roads that are proposed, even though they're probably less populated. So that's just an item to consider that I was thinking today when it came up about the question of street lighting and how it pertains to ORVs. So just an item to consider.
Okay, any further questions or comments? Okay, so you see there's a couple of recommendations there. Is there anybody willing to make a motion to any of them? Councillor Turnbull.
I believe Councillor Coutu had a motion to table.
Thank you. Yeah, I did have a motion to table it until such a time as we get more information on the street lighting.
I wasn't sure if that officially came on. Okay, so there is a motion on the floor, and it's a motion to table this report until such time as a more fulsome lighting, not a lighting survey, but a lighting study done. So is there anybody willing to second that one? Okay, so then we'll go to any of the four remaining ones. Councillor Turnbull.
I will motion that we move ahead with the full implementation of phase 2.
Okay, so that would be the second bullet point. Council may wish to provide access to all 5 proposed designated ORV routes. Is that correct? Okay, so it's moved by Councillor Carmody, seconded by Councillor Donovan. The council approves off-road vehicle access to all 5 proposed designated ORV routes on rural municipal roads without sidewalks or curbing. And that an amendment to the off-road vehicle bylaw 1597/23 be brought forward for formal adoption at a future meeting of the council. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Oh, wait.
Can I ask for a recorded vote, please?
Can we have a recorded vote, please?
Yes, you may.
Okay.
I'll just take over here then and record the votes as they come. So starting with Councillor Coutu, are you voting in favor or against? Councillor Carmody? Or Deputy Mayor Sabrin?
Or
Mayor Service,
Four.
Councillor Roots, 4. And Councillor Donovan.
4.
It's carried.
Okay, again, Chris and Don, thank you very much for your work on this. It's been a long journey, and I know that you and your staff took quite a bit of time to get us to this point. Okay. Chris, next we have PW-12-2024 Petawawa Wastewater System 2023 Annual Report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, just a question of order, sorry.
You can.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
God forbid taxpayers get a say. My bad.
Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Okay, PW-12-2024, this will be fairly short. It's our annual report for the wastewater system. Looking through the report, there were, everything looked good. There was a few items that came up as far as the one bypass in June of 2023, which was an unplanned bypass after a large rainstorm event. I did speak to Brad Sweet today with regards to that event, just to have a further discussion on it and more clarity on it. And part of the challenges we had during that event was one of our grit tanks was being worked on. So the grit tanks are essentially one of the main inflow areas to the plant, and there's 3 of them. So the one was shut down and was emptied and was being worked on at that time as part of the tender. So that would have affected the amount of sewage that could enter the plant. It's hard to tell if that in and of itself caused the bypass, but it would have been a factor in the whole event that day. But it is not the norm. As Brad Sweet pointed out to me, it's a very rare thing for a bypass at our plant, just based on the capacity that the plant can handle. But also, Petawawa actually has very good inflow and infiltration control, which means we don't have a lot of stormwater getting into our sewage system, which helps the plant to not have to treat water that really doesn't need to be treated. It should be in the storm system. So overall, the plant is doing very well, and by all accounts, as your director, I'm very happy with Aqua and how our contractor is managing our plants. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions about the wastewater system annual report? Councilor Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chris, I was looking through it, I can't find it now, with regards to the anticipated completion of the inspection. You had identified that we might be a little behind on them.
No problem, Councilor Donovan. I can answer that as well. So as far as inspections go, the wastewater treatment plant is not the norm that it has to be done annually. If anything, if we're not being inspected, that's probably even better. So less frequent inspections just simply means that the MECP hasn't flagged anything. They're not getting too many bypasses. They're not receiving water quality flags that are saying, hey, we better get up to Petawawa and check out how that wastewater plant is functioning in the community. So in this case, I believe we were quite a few years actually between inspections. So I think it just shows that the plant is running well. And that's the sentiment that Brad Sweet also echoed today when I was chatting with him about it.
That's great, thank you. Good to know that they're reactive as opposed to required. Right.
Proactive.
Proactive.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, they'll be reactive, right? They'll come up if something happens.
That's correct. We're being proactive in how we manage the plant so that hopefully they don't visit.
Thank you.
I think it was 2015. the last inspection.
That's correct.
So that's a good news story. The fact that they don't have to come up here all the time. Any other questions or comments on the water wastewater report? I've always said we have, I've been a lot of places and drank a lot of municipal water, but there's no better tasting water than the water right here in the town of Petawawa. So keep up the good work, you and Aqua both. I need a motion to accept the report. Moved by Councillor Carmody, seconded by Councillor Roots, that the Petawawa wastewater system 2023 annual report be accepted as presented. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Thanks, Chris.
So thank you very much.
So you get to go watch the Leaf game.
Oh, another loss.
Okay, next we have economic development. Monthly report, March 2024. Christine. Thank you for waiting patiently.
Yes, and I'm making this quite, I apologize in advance. This is the March report for the Economic Development Department. It is before you. You've had the opportunity to read it. I just want to highlight a few key activities, noting with the grand opening that happened on March 1st of Thai Valley, some level of activity in the industrial park, which Karen is going to speak of in terms of some reporting, but in terms of some expansion of lands that have already been sold and developed. It's quite exciting. We might have some more warehousing space for entrepreneurs and developers in the very near future that is currently under permit, which is very exciting. I do want to also note on March the 22nd that there was meetings with the joint venture partner group for Metro. They have an aggressive development plan and are actively seeking expressions of interest in space in the commercial area. So documentation has gone out on PBAN socials and is available on the municipal website and has been circulated to interested parties. There is a company that they have engaged out of Ottawa who is professionals in this field who are also working towards that, and other development ideas that staff did have subsequent additional meetings on, which will be reported in April. Carrying on, obviously we participated in International Women's Day. We were partners with the Ottawa Valley Chamber of Commerce as well as with OV Boss Bay's activities. You can see that we are working towards the container market opening. Today, in fact, our 2 new 7x7 containers were installed at the site. And so we now have 7 container units, 5 10x10s and 2 7x7s that are fully operational for this season. We have also begun talking about the Ramble, and we'll be doing so again at Showcase, which is happening this weekend. Key highlights. We did interviews for the Economic Development Coordinator position in the month of March, and we did hire Ruby Cadlick. Ruby started with us Monday last week and hit the ground running. So good choice. Very happy person here in front of you. Finally, I did submit a Main Street Community Activation application on March 31st of this year. Projects ongoing or in the queue were eligible, and so I made a project request that was something that we are already doing within the community, just to offset some of the expenses and to do a little bit of an expansion on it. And that concludes my summary report. I'll take any questions if there are.
Thank you, Christine. That's very exciting. It's this weekend that the container market opens up.
The container market opens May 4th as a soft. Yeah.
And I also noticed, was there some kind of a little band shell covering installed there as well?
Yeah, we did put in a little gazebo over the area designated last year for our entertainment, just to avoid having to set up a tent every Friday when we have those kind of activities. So it's a nice addition to the city.
Yeah, I know. Very exciting. Also exciting to hear that the Metro development is looking to continue on with some sideways expansion in other areas in our town as well. That's great. And I must say, you look a lot more relaxed after a full week of shooting. Questions on the report? Councillor Kern.
Thank you for your service, not really about the report, but just a question about the community improvement plan. I was wondering have we seen any more of an uptick in people taking us up on that, or we have stuff in the pipeline?
So we have a report that I will speak to next about a new ask. We have a completion that we just paid out for Mr. Green's building. so that was completed. I have had lots of meetings. It's up to the business owners to take us up on the opportunity after I've gone to them and explained the process. The challenge is whether they see value in undertaking the process. Mr. Healy did say it was quite simple and there was lots of support and help for him to achieve his requirements. So I'm hoping moving forward, it will be something that we promote again at Showcase this weekend. And as Rudy comes more on board, it will free up more of my time to have more one-on-one conversations with businesses. We are undertaking the FICE and the BRE. Both of those activities, which are happening in this year into the early part of next year, are then planned to inform a revision to the CIP, which we hope to bring forward in the third quarter of 2025.
Great, thank you.
Further questions or comments? Okay, then I need a motion to accept the report. Moved by Councilor Donovan, seconded by Deputy Mayor Savran, that the Economic Development Monthly Report for March be accepted as information. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Okay, next we have ED-01-2024 Community Improvement Plan for 1727 Petawawa Boulevard. Go ahead.
Yes, so this is the CIP improvement request for 1727 Petawawa Boulevard, but otherwise known as the Times Travelers Motel, owned by Guni Patel. I did visit the site in the occasion, had the opportunity to speak with Guni about her requirements. She did meet the CIP requirements. She had 2 quotes for each of her proposed projects. She is looking to receive a grant of up to $5,000 under the Building Facade Improvement Grant, specifically for the painting of the exterior and recladding of some of the window areas related to the motel piece, and up to $5,000 under the Parking Area and Landscape Improvement Grant. She is looking to revitalize the parking at the site. It is currently paved but heavily damaged, specifically at the entrance points off Petawawa Boulevard, and she does have 2 on property. So she has already reached out to BEI and both Greenwood Paving to receive those quotes. So she is dealing with a specific paving company to undertake this work. It is noted that those are the complaints that she receives most as she continues to revitalize this property for use, is that, you know, the parking lot is insufficient and challenging there. As indicated, the bylaw for CIP was undertaken, bylaw 144121, that does allow the municipality to enter into a CIP agreement and offer these funds for eligible projects. Certainly an eligible project. There was $90,000 allocated in the 2024 budget. We do have room to accept either both or one of these 2 grants. This is a first request from this particular business proponent, and so my recommendation is that council approves both requests as presented.
Thank you, Christine. Any questions or comments on the report? It's always nice to see these coming forward because we know in the end it makes our town look better, and it also helps the businesses improve themselves as well. Okay, so if you're satisfied, I need a motion then. Moved by Councilor Woods, seconded by Councilor Twill. The council, under the Community Improvement Plan adopted by bylaw 1441/21, enter into the necessary funding agreement with the applicant and property owner, Guni Patel, for the following SIP financial incentive program, up to $5,000 under the Building Facade Improvement Grant, and up to $5,000 under the Parking Area and Landscape Improvement Grant. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Thanks, Christine. Next, we have Planning and Development Monthly Report for March 2024. Karen.
Good evening. We'll just give you a few highlights. A lot of the items on the report we'll be speaking about tonight, and a number of planning reports. So, of course, the Public Works Edition will be before you this evening. Petawawa Animal Hospital as well. We'll be speaking to that in a site plan report. H&H Construction, again, another report coming before you tonight. Update on Emerson Sack. We did have that public meeting on Monday, April 15th. Final date of appeal for that application is May 6th. We've been talking to the developers with respect to Hoffman Phase 4. They are anxious to move forward now with that agreement and the lifting of part lot control to, which will be nice to clear up that file. It's been ongoing for several years, so hope to see that before you soon. Bradkey Estates, we just received the second draft for the subdivision agreement. Staff is currently reviewing and ensuring that it meets all of our requirements, and then we'll get it out to the developer for their comment. Black Bay subdivision, we have a meeting with the consultants on May 1st to take a look at the various comments that are required. There are a number of studies that have been done and a number of provisions that are being recommended through those studies, one of which is basically a noise barrier that's created along the trail. So it's something that we need to deal with at a staff level before we bring it to council. Emergency planning, good news, we are compliant for 2023, so I'm happy to see that as I move along. Also, one other highlight, April 8th, new senior planner was here, and very pleased to have her on board. And those are basically my updates.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Yes, welcome aboard, Melanie. Good to have you as part of our team here. And you've probably been pretty busy. That's a very busy department these days. Okay, any questions on the report? Okay, then I need a motion to accept the report. Moved by Councillor Padu, seconded by Councillor Carmody, that the Planning and Development Monthly Report from March be accepted as information. I'll call for the vote on the favor. It's carried. Next, we have the Building Activity Monthly Report.
Yes, as you can see, the building permits are coming in. At this stage, garages and decks are on board, so you can take any questions that any of you have.
Any questions on the Building Activity Report? A lot going on there as well. We're a busy town. I need a motion then to accept that report. Moved by Councillor Donovan, seconded by Deputy Mayor Sovereign, that the Building Activity Report for March be accepted as information. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. I'm gonna have a sore neck after these meetings. Have to go to the chiropractor. Okay, next we have PL-09-2024 site plan application for the new veterinary facility. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and this is on part of lot 22, concession 5, being part 1 on plan 49R 20323, branching on Water Tower Road. As you recall, Dr. Scantlin came before council and closed, or I should say, our economic development officer was representing that report. She did submit an offer to purchase a piece of land in the industrial park, and that was accepted by council. So since then, we've been moving through the application process, which has involved a site plan application, as well as a zoning bylaw amendment, and then the sales bylaw requirements as well. I did reference in the report sections 7, 14, and 18 of the official plan. And certainly what Dr. Scantlin is proposing meets the intent of all of those sections of the OP. In terms of the zoning bylaw, the zoning is a general industrial exception 5 zone, and it doesn't specifically permit a vet hospital. and hence there is a requirement that she come forward for a zoning bylaw amendment for the use. And as well, we do have an issue in terms of the overall frontage. 24.9 meters of frontage exists, and under the zoning bylaw, there's a minimum of 30 meters required. So there is a public meeting scheduled for May 6th to hear those items. There has been a circulation to all adjacent property owners within 120 meters of the property. We are also have advertised the sales requirements so that notice of surplus lands, and that will be handled on May 6th as well. So the outline for the site plan, it's a 3,000 square foot building. The parking lot is to be gravel surface. Minimum of 15 parking spaces are required, which is provided 24. 4 bicycle parking spaces are provided. We have the screened garbage enclosure, a septic system, and of course, it's on municipal water. Through the circulation process, there was one item that was highlighted, and that specifically had to do with the barrier-free parking. So staff wanted to make sure, because it's a gravel base, want to make sure that that is maintained accessible. And hence there is a special provision being added to the construction drawings, as well as the development agreement to ensure, noted here, all granular base materials shall be compacted to 98% standard Proctor Max dry density in maximum 200 millimeters thick lip. So this is a standard construction requirement, and this to ensure that we have that very good state. So it is the opinion of staff that the proposed site plan to permit the construction of a veterinary hospital on the subject land is appropriate, and recommends that council conditionally grant site plan approval, subject to the owner obtaining a zoning bylaw amendment for the use and frontage requirements. And the complete transfer of the lands to Dr. Stanton would occur at the same time as the registration of the development agreement.
Thank you, Karen. Questions or comments on the report? Deputy Mayor Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Karen, for addressing that accessible piece. Is there sufficient data that, particularly because we have winters and lots of moisture and stuff like that, that dry density maximum 200 millimeter thick lips will disallow permeation to make it soft and wear it out? Do we have data that, like, is that what the data tells us? Is that that's what it means, so that it will maintain its integrity over the long term?
Exactly. We went back to the engineer to say, basically, what is the best practice to ensure that that space is maintained, and this is what we were provided with.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Is there a future intention on behalf of the applicant to perhaps pave that in the future? Or
I don't believe so.
okay.
It's basically not a standard that we have in the industrial park, so it's not something that we have asked for necessarily. Council would need to direct staff to create additional provisions required within the industrial park.
Okay. Any other questions on? And I need a motion. Moved by Councilor Root, seconded by Councilor Donovan. The council supports site plan approval for the Upper Ottawa Valley Veterinary Professional Corporation on the following conditions: that the owner obtains a zoning bylaw amendment for the use and reduced frontage requirements for the development, that the owner enters into a site development agreement with the town, and that the transfer of lands is completed in accordance with the declaration of surplus land. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Okay, next we have PL-10. Dash 24, lifting part lot control block 5, plan 49M-118, Samantha Crescent.
Yes, thank you. As you know, this is just a standard lifting of part lot control request. Recommendation that council enacts a part lot control exemption bylaw for Block 5 on Plan 49M118 to expire 2 years from the date of its passing. This is actually an information report at this stage. The bylaw will actually come before council on May 6th. And the looking at part lot control is to create 6 townhouse units.
Any questions or comments on that report? Then I need a motion to enact part lot control. Moved by Councillor Kikuyu, seconded by Deputy Mayor Sabrin, that council enacts a part lot control exemption bylaw for Block 5 on Plan 49M-118 to expire 2 years from the date of its passing. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Next, we have PL-11-2024, site plan application for William and Sons in the industrial zone.
Yes, again, part of lot 22, concession 5, being part 1 on Plan 49R20051, property fronts on Water Tower Road. Recommendation that council supports site plan approval for William Sons on condition that the owner enters into a site development agreement with the town and the transfer of land is completed in accordance with the declaration of surplus land. Another offer of purchase and sale provided to the town. Mr. Benke was submitted that application. Again, we've been moving through the site plan process to ensure that's in place prior to transfer of land. I've noted the official plan, policies, and the zoning bylaw. Official plan, the application is certainly it meets the requirements of the VOP as well as the zoning bylaw. All of the provisions are met. The site plan includes 1.49 hectares of land in the industrial park. The proposed development includes an 8,000 square foot building with associated parking, snow storage, and additional exterior storage compound. This is to accommodate his heavy equipment and fiber spool storage that's required for his business. It is the opinion of staff that the proposed site plan to permit the construction of a contractor yard and shop and associated storage yard is appropriate, and recommends that council conditionally grant site plan approval subject to the proponent entering into a site development agreement and the completion of the transfer of lands.
Any questions, comments? Nice to see this one moving forward because I know there's some impetus here to get the construction business away from some residential areas. So it's good to see this on the move. I need a motion. Moved by Councillor Root, seconded by Councillor Carmody. That council supports site plan approval for 10003552221 Ontario Incorporated, William and Sons, on condition that the owner enters into a site development agreement with the town and the transfer of lands is completed in accordance with the declaration of surplus land. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That's carried. Next, we have PL-12-2024 site plan application, Public Works Garage Office Addition, off Bay Road.
Yes, recommendation that council support site plan approval for the Public Works Garage Office Addition. So the site plan application was submitted for review and circulation March 2024. And as you know, the proposal includes a 3,200 square foot office addition. The subject lands again within the industrial park, zoning general industrial exception 5, and the office addition is a permitted use. I have noted there is a bit of an issue with respect to the exterior side yard. Under the zoning bylaw, there's a minimum setback of 15 meters, and the site plan is identifying approximately 13.3 meters. So in order to deal with that situation, it's either a redesign and change in building area or a minor variance application before the committee of adjustment. And certainly staff would recommend the latter, moving forward with the minor variance. The reduction in exterior side yard doesn't impact any other lands in the immediate area. So in conclusion, opinion of staff that the proposed site plan to permit the construction of an office addition is appropriate and recommends that council support the granting of site plan approval on condition that a minor variance or a building redesign is completed.
Any questions or comments on that? So when I read this motion, because in the motion in front of me, it doesn't mention the minor variance. Is that okay?
I think you put it in.
Can you just repeat that?
So, council support the granting of site. Council support the granting of site plan approval on condition that a minor variance is obtained.
Okay, so I need a motion. Moved by Councilor Root, seconded by Councilor Coutu. The council supports site plan approval for the Public Works Garage Office on condition that a minor variance is obtained. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? That's carried. That's really exciting to see that one moving forward. It's been long overdue, and that will help us with our capacity issues up there. Okay, next we have PL-13-2024 zoning bylaw amendment application H&H Construction Incorporated, part of Lot 20, concession for Thornville. Karen?
Thank you. Recommendation, this report has been provided for information purposes only. A public meeting for the zoning bylaw amendment application has been scheduled for Tuesday, May 21st. At that time, you will have an opportunity to discuss anything further with the consultant who will be here. Circulation was completed by mail, so all landowners within 120 meters have been notified of the application. As part of the official plan update, we were approached and agreed that the lands would be redesignated from an extractive industrial and extractive industrial reserve type zone, designation, basically to an industrial. As you can see, within the immediate area, there's significant industrial development already along the road. This is a 31-acre parcel of land. Under the zoning bylaw, as I noted, extractive industrial and extractive industrial reserve. The proponent that it will be coming forward with the site plan application is in fact a logging hauler, and they are working on a transfer of those lands from H&H, so that their logging and hauling operations can move the town of Petawawa. So the proposed rezoning provides lands for industrial development, again in an area where there is already several industrial uses. And site plan control will be required for any use that goes onto that property.
Okay, so are there any questions or comments? So we're receiving that report as information and looking forward to the public meeting on May 23rd. Okay, next we have PL-14-2024 application for consent for James W. LaPointe Motor Holdings on Barron Canyon Road.
Yes, thank you. The report has been provided for information purposes only. Comments have been provided to the county of Renfrew. Probably the easiest way to deal with the severances is a reference to the severance sketch. We did provide you with a copy of the severance sketch. There are 3 lots being proposed along Barron Canyon Road. Fairly large parcels, between 6 to 9 acre parcels. And the retained lands are approximately 177 acres. In terms of the zoning bylaw, there is a need for site-specific zoning bylaw amendments for each particular parcel. The first being, as you can see from the sketch, there is an existing barn across the road from these proposed severances. So there's a minimum distance separation required from the barn to any new sensitive use. So that's what you're seeing for lot one. Beyond that red dotted line, that's basically where a house can be constructed. So the site-specific zoning bylaw for that will require a distance, a front yard setback. So it's 7.5 under our current bylaw. We're probably looking at over 150 meters. For the second lot, you will note that there are several outbuildings on the property. These in fact could house livestock, which could in fact then create another minimum distance separation requirement. So the proposed restriction or zoning amendment is basically to prohibit any outbuildings to be used for livestock purposes, for housing. And then finally, B104, there is a minimum frontage requirement of 30 meters within an R1 zone. 20 meters is provided currently, and hence they will also be required to get a zoning bylaw amendment for that frontage. We will also note that two of the proposed lots have very long driveways, and the fire department wants to be assured that they do have access. And hence a condition on the consent will require a statement to the effect for on purchase and sale agreement, so that people are aware that the length of driveway that they're getting into and the potential costs involved there, so that they're aware of the situation. And that's basically our comments.
Questions on that? I just have a question about the length of the driveway in terms of the fire service. Is there a minimum width that driveway has to be in order to allow our fire service vehicles to access the property at the back? And if there is a minimum width, does that have to be maintained? So in other words, they can't just keep allowing trees to grow, and this has to be maintained to a certain width for our fire service vehicles to go in.
Yes, the fire department did note width and clearance as well. In fact, what may have to occur with these types of requirements is a development agreement on title, so that it does move from one owner to the next.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so we'll receive that as information as well. Thanks, Karen. That was a very lengthy report today. Hope we got through it. Okay, nothing for general matters. We do have a closed meeting, so I need a motion to then close. Moved by Councillor Root, seconded by Councillor Donovan, that the meeting be closed pursuant to section 239, paragraph 2, paragraph 6C of the Municipal Act 2001 S.O. 2001 C.25 as amended, to discuss a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board. I'll call for the vote on it. It's carried.